Something massive is brewing off the coast of Venezuela, and almost nobody is talking about it. U.S. warships have been spotted in the Caribbean, fueling speculation that Washington is preparing for a high-stakes showdown with Nicolas Maduro's government. Is this just military posturing, or the prelude to something far more explosive? The truth behind these movements is tangled with oil, politics, and power plays that stretch far beyond South America. And trust me, once you hear the details, you'll never look at this situation the same way again. But before we dive into the hidden story behind these tensions, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what I'm about to reveal next could shock you. To understand why U.S. warships showing up near Venezuela is such a big deal, you have to rewind a bit. For years, relations between Washington and Caracas have been nothing short of a roller coaster. Ever since Nicolas Maduro took power after Hugo Chavez, Venezuela has been locked in a political crisis. The U.S. never fully recognized Maduro as the legitimate leader, instead throwing its support behind opposition figures, and that sparked years of diplomatic hostility. But it wasn't just politics. The U.S. hit Venezuela with heavy sanctions, especially targeting its oil industry, the very lifeline of the Venezuelan economy. Overnight, the country's ability to sell crude on the international market collapsed, deepening the humanitarian crisis inside its borders. Millions fled, poverty skyrocketed, and yet, Maduro's grip on power remained firm. Every attempt at regime change, whether through diplomatic isolation, economic pressure, or backing opposition movements, failed to push him out. And the more Washington tried, the closer Venezuela moved toward allies like Russia, China, and Iran. That's where today's tension really comes from. It's not just a standoff between the U.S. and Venezuela, it's a flashpoint in a much larger geopolitical struggle. And as we'll see, the timing of these new military maneuvers is no coincidence, because something bigger is unfolding right now. So why is all of this happening now? That's the real question. The sudden appearance of American warships near Venezuela isn't random. The timing is very deliberate. For starters, Venezuela is heading into a crucial election season. Maduro is fighting to maintain his grip on power, while opposition leaders are trying to rally international support. The U.S., of course, has a long history of turning up the pressure during these politically sensitive moments. It sends a message. Washington is watching, and it won't tolerate what it sees as election manipulation. But there's another layer: energy politics. With global oil markets under strain, Venezuela's massive crude reserves are suddenly more valuable than ever. For years, U.S. sanctions cut off Venezuela's oil from much of the world. But recently, Washington eased some restrictions, hoping to stabilize global supply. The timing of these military maneuvers raises eyebrows. Is this about protecting energy interests, or reminding Maduro who holds the leverage? And then there's the geopolitical angle. While the U.S. flexes its muscles in the Caribbean, Russia and China continue deepening ties with Venezuela, investing billions in its energy and defense sectors. To Washington, this isn't just about Maduro. It's about blocking rivals from gaining a foothold in America's own backyard. So when you put it all together, the elections, the oil, the global power struggle, the question isn't just why now, it's what comes next. And that's where things start to get even more unsettling. So what exactly are these U.S. warships doing near Venezuela? Officially, Washington calls it a routine operation. The Pentagon insists it's about maintaining freedom of navigation in international waters. Nothing more, nothing less. But when heavily armed destroyers and support vessels show up just miles from Venezuelan territory, it doesn't feel routine to anyone living there. Local media in Caracas has been buzzing with speculation. Some say it's a rehearsal for a potential blockade, a show of power meant to rattle Maduro's government and remind him of the U.S. Navy's reach. Others believe it's about intercepting illegal smuggling routes, a cover story that conveniently overlaps with pressuring Venezuela. What makes this even more striking is the scale. Reports suggest multiple U.S. vessels have been rotating in and out of the Caribbean, paired with aircraft surveillance missions. That kind of presence is expensive, coordinated, and very intentional. You don't spend millions moving warships around unless you're trying to send a very loud message. For ordinary Venezuelans, the sight of U.S. ships just over the horizon sparks both fear and hope. fear that tensions could boil over into a direct clash, hope that outside pressure might finally crack Maduro's hold on the country. Either way, the warships have become more than steel floating in the ocean. They're a symbol of just how volatile this moment really is. But if the US is flexing its muscles, you can bet Maduro isn't staying silent. And his response is nothing short of fiery. If the US thought its show of force would intimidate Nicolas Maduro, they miscalculated. Instead of backing down, the Venezuelan president went on the offensive, at least with his words. In fiery speeches broadcast across state television, Maduro accused Washington of plotting an invasion and vowed that Venezuela would defend its sovereignty at any cost. Almost immediately, the Venezuelan military began staging large-scale drills. Tanks rolled through city streets, fighter jets flew over Caracas, and soldiers paraded with banners declaring loyalty to the government. On state TV, generals stood beside Maduro, promising that any foreign threat would be met with, quote, a rain of fire. Whether or not Venezuela's military could actually stand up to the US is another story, but the optics were clear. Maduro wanted the world to see defiance, not weakness. Behind the rhetoric, though, there's a calculated strategy. By framing the US presence as imperial aggression, Maduro rallies nationalist support at home, shifting attention away from the country's deep economic crisis. And internationally, the louder he pushes back, the more he paints himself as a victim of foreign bullying. Something that earns him sympathy from allies like Russia, China, and even some non-aligned nations. So while US warships project power on the seas, Maduro projects power through propaganda and spectacle. But his words alone aren't enough to shift the balance. And that's where the global dimension of the standoff becomes impossible to ignore. The US and Venezuela may be at the center of this standoff, but they are far from the only players. What makes this crisis so dangerous is the web of international alliances wrapped around it. Venezuela is not standing alone. Maduro has long cultivated ties with US adversaries Russia, China, Iran, and Cuba. Moscow supplies weapons and military advisors. Beijing provides economic lifelines, buying Venezuelan oil despite sanctions. And Iran, it's believed to be supplying drone technology, the same Shahid-style drones seen in Ukraine, now potentially in Venezuelan hands. These connections mean that any conflict in the Caribbean doesn't stay regional. It risks drawing in global rivals of the United States. Meanwhile, Washington isn't just flexing muscles for Caracas to see. It's also sending a message to Beijing and Moscow. America is willing to project power into the Western Hemisphere, the same way they've tried doing in Eastern Europe and the South China Sea. It's a high-stakes game of geopolitical chess. And then there's Latin America. Venezuela's defense minister has warned that any US aggression would be an attack not just on his country, but on all of Latin America and the Caribbean. Whether neighboring nations truly buy into that narrative is debatable, but the message is clear. Caracas is trying to frame this fight as David versus Goliath, Latin America versus Washington. In short, this isn't just AU.S. Venezuela showdown. It's a flashpoint with the potential to ripple through global power struggles, pulling in allies and adversaries alike. And that makes what comes next all the more unpredictable. On the surface, Washington insists this naval buildup is all about one thing: stopping the flow of drugs. US officials say Venezuela has become a major transit hub for cocaine moving out of Colombia and into American cities. President Trump's team argues that deploying thousands of sailors and Marines is about dismantling cartels and protecting US communities. But here's the problem: the size of this force doesn't match that mission. Military analysts point out that you don't need nuclear submarines, guided missile destroyers, and amphibious assault ships just to intercept drug boats. This is a war-ready fleet, not a Coast Guard patrol. So what's the real motive? Some believe this is about regime change. Nicolas Maduro isn't just accused of corruption and drug trafficking. Washington outright refuses to recognize him as Venezuela's legitimate leader. In fact, the US has placed a $50 million bounty on his head. Add in reports of election fraud, violent crackdowns on protesters, and alliances with Russia, China, and Iran, and Maduro has become the perfect villain in America's eyes. There's also the geopolitical angle. By moving warships so close to Venezuelan waters, the US is signaling to rivals: we can project power anywhere, anytime. It's as much about containing Russia and China's influence in Latin America as it is about narcotics. In short, while the official story is drugs, the bigger picture is about politics, power, and possibly removing Maduro from office. Which brings us to the final, most important question. What happens next? So where does this all lead? Right now, both sides are locked in a dangerous game of chicken. The US is flexing its muscles with one of the largest naval deployments Latin America has seen in decades. Venezuela is posturing with drones, warships, and fiery speeches. But the truth is, nobody knows who will blink first. Some analysts believe it's all saber-rattling. That Washington wants to rattle Maduro, not invade him. By keeping 4,500 troops, Marines, and warships just offshore, the US sends a daily reminder that Maduro is cornered, without actually pulling the trigger. Others warn that precision strikes are very much on the table. Tomahawk missiles launched from destroyers or submarines could wipe out cartel bases, drug labs, or even government facilities without a single Marine setting foot on shore. And if that happens, Maduro has promised a republic in arms. That means drones could target US ships, dragging both nations into open conflict. And then there's the wildcard regime change. Some believe this isn't about cartels at all, but about removing Maduro once and for all. If US Marines ever hit those beaches, it would trigger a regional crisis that could reshape South America for years to come. For now, it's a powder keg waiting for a spark. One miscalculation, one missile, one drone, and the entire region could be set on fire. The only question left is, who's willing to make the first move? For now, it's a powder keg waiting for a spark. One miscalculation, one missile, one drone, and the entire region could be set on fire. The only question left is, who's willing to make the first move? If you've been following this story, you know how fast things are escalating, and how much is still unknown. Will this end with diplomacy, or are we on the edge of a full-blown conflict? We'll be covering every twist and turn as it happens. So if you want to stay ahead of the headlines, make sure you hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think the US is preparing for regime change? Or is this all just a show of force? Either way, this isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning.